Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, and I hope you had a good Shabbat, nice weather, and we continue our series of ethical medics in Halacha, bioethics in Halacha, and our topic for today is more gentle than last week's. Last week was about prioritization in healthcare. But this week, we are speaking about something which is no less important, but just a little less dramatic. That is preventive care or preventive medicine. The principle of preventive medicine is that instead of curing the disease or the ailment when it appears, we can take certain measures while we are healthy to prevent the disease from attacking us, which is very simple thing and very logical for most of us. And I will just add that up to, let's say, to the appearance of modern medicine, that was more or less the only thing that that medicine could really offer, because they had no good ways to treat a disease when it appeared. There were no antibiotics, there was no real treatment that could be offered. So mostly what the doctors were able to do is to give good advices to people that were willing to listen, how to live your life in a way in which would remain healthy, And we'll do it in a minute, we'll see that, for example, when Rambam speaks about medicine, when Rambam speaks about being healthy, when Rambam speaks about the mitzvot, keeping our life, he doesn't say any word about taking medicine when someone is sick. That is simple, that is obvious. The real novelty, according to Rambam, is our duty and obligation, for reasons that we will see in a few minutes, to keep us healthy and to be actively engaged in maintaining ourselves, we may say, even before, mostly before we fall sick. And the questions that we would like to try and investigate today would be, first, we try to see what are the sources of this obligation as such an obligation does exist. So what are the sources of such an obligation to be engaged in proactive healthcare in order to prevent diseases? And then after understanding the sources, the roots of such an obligation to the extent it does exist, then we will try to see what are the limits of such an obligation, what is the depth of such an obligation, to what extent are we obligated to do so, both in positive terms, what we must do in order to maintain our care, and what we are not allowed to do. And also, to what extent can maybe such a thing can be forced or coerced. And we know that in last years, a few times there was a question of the vaccines, which I guess would also again rise when the vaccines for Corona would be available. And to what extent a state is supposed to enforce people to be vaccinated or to vaccinate their children. So I don't know how much, that's a lot to put on our plate. So I'm not sure how much of that we would be able to do this week. Maybe some of it we'll do next week, maybe in some other occasion. But that's basically the type of questions we would like to tackle today. So again, much less dramatic than last week. We will not speak about people that are right now in a traumatic or dramatic situation, but about what are we supposed to do in order not to reach such a situation. Now, we would begin with a few sources from the Rambam, which I think, being who he was, being a doctor, he had a very rich understanding of our obligation and most important, our ability to prevent illness by the actions we take when we are healthy. So illness is many times is not a fate decree. It is a question of how do we handle ourselves. Now, again, obviously some things we cannot prevent. Some things just happen to us. But to the extent that we are responsible to ourselves, what are we, and again, to what level are we obligated to guard ourselves? So in Ilchot Rotzeach Ushmirat HaNefesh, so it's very interesting. Rambam packs in the same topic, under the same title, he puts the halachot, the laws of the murderer, and the laws obligating ourselves to keep ourselves healthy. So he saw that as close topics, as neighboring topics. So our obligations or our prohibition on murdering others is also expressing itself in our obligation not to hurt ourselves. And in the 11th chapter of these halachot of the murderer and our obligation to guard our life, then Rambam says, mitzvat aseh, there is a positive commandment, la'asot adam ma'akeh legago. So there is a positive commandment to build a fence around our roof. Obviously, we're speaking about flat roofs that people can and do live upon. So everywhere in which there is a height gap, that someone can fall and be damaged or even worse, then there is a mitzvah from the Torah to build a fence around our roof. And Rambam says it's not only pretending to a roof, אחד הגג ואחד כל דבר שיש בו סכנה. So it's not only about roofs, it's regarding everything that may be dangerous. So for example, מכגון שהייתה לו באר או בור בחצרו. So if someone has a well or a pit, a water pit in his yard, and there are water in there, or maybe without water, anyhow, he must make a fence around it or cover it to prevent people from falling inside. And he's not allowed to say, it's my home, I am allowed to do whatever I want. You are obligated by the Torah, and if you won't do it yourself, we can coerce you, you can enforce this law, that you are not allowed to leave possible damage in your property. So you cannot say, I am digging a pit in my own property and do not intervene with my actions. We may say, even in your own property, there are certain safety measures that we can enforce. וכן כל מכשול שיש בו סכנת נפשות. That refers to any danger which may involve life risk situations. There is a positive commandment to remove the danger and to guard ourselves from it and to be very careful about it. As it says, Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha. We should keep ourselves safe, we should guard our lives. Ve'im lo hesir, if you did not remove this danger, ve'heniach hamichsholot hamevi'im lidei sakana, and the pitfalls remained open, then you have transgressed this positive commandment, and you have went against the Isur, the prohibition of lo tasim damim, do not put blood in your house. Now Rambam continues, הרבה דברים אסרו חכמים, מפני שיש בהם סכנת נפשות. So there are many things, many acts that were prohibited by the sages. Why? Because they consider them dangerous. And then he gives a short list. And he says, you are not allowed to announce that I am only endangering myself. What do others have in the issue? They have no say. Or one cannot say, well, no, I am not, I don't care. I don't think it's dangerous. No, if we deem it as dangerous, then we can enforce you. So it gives a few examples. There are many, many more examples. Here it gives a few, and I quoted only a few. לא יניח אדם פיו על הסילון המקלח מים וישתה. So if there is a water pipe, and the water are coming out, you are not allowed to drink directly from the pipe. Why? Because the pipe may be contained, and you are drinking directly and you do not see the water. You must first put the water in some cup, and then you can look into the cup and see maybe there are little animals inside or something, and that may be dangerous. So obviously he speaks about his own time, we have different problems, but the basic principle is very, very clear. And that is that we must refrain from actions that may be dangerous. Now, there we can see that there is an obligation from the Torah, ועשית מעקה לגגיך לא תעשה מדמים בביתך, that we must build a fence around our roofs, and we must not put blood in our houses. On the other hand, there are certain things that were only banned by the sages. Now, what exactly is the difference? Why some of these matters are what we call deoraita, meaning they are on biblical level of prohibition, and some of them are only the Rabbanan. There are many suggestions. The basic line is that it seems that if it's a dramatic danger, if it's a high risk, then it would be asur from the Torah to leave it. If it's a smaller percentage, then it's only an issue by the sages. It seems that's the basic distinction. But again, these are the basic foundations of our obligation for what we call preventive care. So we see from here that one is not allowed to act in ways that would cause danger, even if right now, meaning the chances that by right now drinking from this pipe, I would immediately get chas v'chayla some disease and die. Obviously, that's a very far chance. That's very far away. But if we take into considerations all of the people that would drink and maybe also the accumulative danger, then that was a good enough cause for the sages to proclaim it asur, to drink directly from the water pipe. And again, we should take it to our situations, obviously. But here we see the obligation to keep one's life. And as I said, Rambam sees that as a neighboring topic to the prohibition of murder. So in the same way you are not allowed to murder, chas v'chayla, or to endanger others, you are not allowed to murder or to endanger yourself to the extent that we can enforce it on you. And I guess that we are all familiar with the minhag or the issur not to eat meat and fish together. Now that is, if we look at the plain meaning of the Gemara, the reason for that is that Chazal believed that eating fish and meat together may cause leprosy, tzaraat. Now, again, I am not sure what exactly did Chazal have in mind when they spoke about leprosy. We are not even sure what type of disease they were speaking about, excuse me. And I am not sure if the scientific knowledge that they were using is relevant today. And I am not sure if our minhag, custom of avoiding eating meat or fish stems from the same reason. So I'm not going to go into any of the specific issues that are being raised because each one of them is a topic and may require and deserves a shiur by itself. But that's only one example of something that we are all very familiar with that, again, at least according to the planning of the Gemara, is out of safety consideration. Out of safety consideration. In Ilchot Deot, in the beginning, more or less in the beginning of Mishnah Torah, Rambam gives a much lengthier discussion and analysis of the proper way one should act in order to keep his health in the right way. So, and again, it's fascinating chapters, and it is fascinating to see to what extent Rambam there is aligned, again, more or less, I wouldn't say 100%, but let's say 90% of what is written there. He is aligned with the conclusions of modern medicine, although he wrote his words more than 800 years ago. So in Ilchot Deot he says, הואיל והיות הגוף בריא ושלם מדרכי השם הוא. So keeping our body healthy and in good condition is from the ways of God. That's a very strong statement. So if you want to walk in God's path, you must maintain your body healthy and in proper condition. Why? שהרי אי אפשר שיבין או ידע דבר מידיעת הבורא, והוא חולה. If you want to better understand God, which by Rambam, that is our end goal, to understand God's wisdom and to act according to God's wisdom, which is the Torah. So our purpose in life is to learn and apply God's wisdom. Now, if you are sick, you cannot do that. If you lie in bed, you cannot do that. So that's why, says Rambam, it's very simple. Even if we do not speak about life-endangering situations, but chas v'chayil, someone would only become sick, it's also something we must avoid. I would almost say at any cost. לפיכך, therefore, צריך להרחיק אדם עצמו מדברים המאבדים את הגוף. So we must distance ourselves from everything that may damage our body. ולהנהיג עצמו, and we should enact ourselves in a way, בדברים המבריאים והמחלימים, in things that would make us feel better. Very simple. Very, very simple to say, very difficult to do. ואלו, and then he gives a long list. Unfortunately, maybe I should have, but we wouldn't right now read everything he writes there. But I will tell you, it's in a very simple Hebrew. Also, there are very good translations online. You can go and see for yourself and just, just act accordingly. Because again, his list is more or less in line with modern medicine advices for preventive healthcare. So let's read just a few examples. So he says, ואלו הן, לעולם לא יאכל אדם אלא כשהוא רעב, ולא ישתה אלא כשהוא צמא. Do not eat and drink excessively. Very simple. He says, that's the first instruction. If you are not hungry, why should you eat? Now, it doesn't mean that you care for sugar. Hungry is hungry. So if your body right now does not need food, don't eat it. Very simple. Now again, I skip because here he has a long list of good and bad food, and you can guess that he says that fat food is not good for you, and extremely sharp food is not good. Food should be, he says, it should be in the middle way. So it should be moderate, not too sharp, not too mellow, not too hot, not too cold, not too much, and not too little. And he says, ועוד כלל אחר, so after he finished speaks about food, and again, you need to see it inside, it's beautiful. He says, another rule they said regarding keeping our body healthy. כל זמן שאדם מתעמל. Oh, he speaks about exercises. He says you should be mit'amel. That's very modern Hebrew. Mit'amel means to take exercises, to take walks, to run, to lift weights. So, כל זמן שאדם מתעמל ויגע הרבה. So if you walk yourself, do a workout, ואינו שבע, and you not eat too much, ומאב רפין, but on the other hand, you not force yourself, pardon me, in the bathroom. אין חולי בא עליו. So you won't get disease. וכוחו מתחזק, ואפילו אוכל מאכלות, even if you do not eat completely properly. And that I heard from a physician also, that I went to consult with, and he told me, obviously we should eat healthy. But it's even more important to exercise. Now again, chas v'chayil, someone is completely unhealthy, then that's very bad. But if someone is not completely keeping his diet, but he's working out every day, in a proper manner, then that can make up maybe for less good eating habits. But if you do not work out at all, וכל מישהו יושב לבטח, if you only sit and give שיעורים, right? And you do not work out, he says, then, or if you wait too much before you go to the bathroom, then even if you are eating more or less well, כל ימיו יהיו מכאובים וכוחות השש. Then in the long way, in the long run, then you would find your muscles painful and your force would be drained, your energy would be drained. And that's extremely interesting. So he speaks about how you should eat, how you should exercise, וכל המנהגות הטובות האלו שאמרנו, and then again, and he goes at length about speaking how you should exercise, and that's in Hilchot Deot, the 4th chapter. Again, I highly recommend reading. I mean, I highly recommend everything that Rambam wrote, but these words of his are just in gold. And he says, all of these good customs, all of these good practices I gave you, he says, אין ראוי לנהוג בהן אלא בריא. I'm speaking here to those people that are healthy. But if you are sick, or one of your organs is in pain, or if you had a bad habit for many years, and we'll speak about smoking, for example, in a few minutes, then if you are sick, that's a completely different story. Then you should go to the doctor and he will have prescriptions for you. So that's this differentiation he makes here in the last sentence. That's exactly the differentiation between preventive care and the care of diseases. And these are almost two different branches in medicine. It's one of our main problems that unfortunately we invest many, we need to invest much in active care. But if we would invested in proactive care in the same degree, in the same way, then we would not have needed to put so much resources and energy. They say again, there are very interesting studies about how every shekel you put into preventive care can later save, let's say, I don't have the numbers, but 2 shekels, 3 shekels in active care. And now, obviously, money is the less important aspect of it. But suffering and life-saving is the more important factor. So all of that is very simple. I bought it from the Rambam because he was a doctor and he gives I think the most extensive and exhaustive research in halacha about this, about preventive care. But there is no one that would argue. No one would argue that we should keep healthy lifestyle. That is very much clear. It's also very much clear that you need to hear and to listen to the doctors of your own time that know you, and act according to their instructions. So all of that is very simple, and I'm sure that for that you do not need my shiur. But just very interesting to see that it's rooted in halacha. It's rooted in halacha. It's rooted in our obligation not to hurt others and not to hurt ourselves. It's rooted in our obligation to be of the Hashem, servants of God, and one cannot be a reliable servant of God if he's lying in bed. That's not what God had in plan for us. We need to be healthy. Now, Rambam is going even one extra step, and here many of the other authorities of Yahadut would not agree with him, but he goes one extra step. And he says not only that we are obligated to keep our health and to act in a way that would encourage health, but also he explained many of the mitzvot in the Torah as rooted in this concept of taking care of ourselves, of keeping us healthy. And here I'm reading from the Moire Nevochi, from the Guide for the Perplexed. And and again, just one example. So here it's an example from the Isur to eat different animals and different foods. So says Rambam, in a very general and bold statement, כל מה שאסרתו התורה עלינו מן המאכלים, מזונם מגונה. He says, everything that the Torah banned us from eating, I don't know, cats, ducks, lions, everything that we are not supposed to eat, that is because mezonam megune, what they eat or they themselves are bad nutrition, bad food for us. ואין בכל מה שנאסר עלינו מה שיסופק שאין היזק בו. So there is no doubt, he says, that everything that was banned on us from eating is bad, is damaging our health. Now, again, that's a very bold statement, and I'm not going to even claim that I know why, I don't know, horse meat is worse than cow meat. I don't know, maybe it is, I have no idea. Rambam was a doctor, he thought that's the truth. So I'm willing to accept Rambam's authority on that. Anyhow, even let's say that, I mean, obviously Rambam would say that, let's say that the research, nowadays studies would prove that it is healthy to eat horses. Obviously, we would not eat horses, nonetheless. But the basic argument is that there is a correlation between banned food, non-kosher food, treif food, and unhealthy food. By the way, many people in Israel are careful to eat only kosher food, not necessarily because they are extremely religious, they are even far from being religious, but because they know that usually meat that is inspected for kosherness is also healthier in the sense that it is being stored properly. You are not allowed to keep it for too long before you freeze it or before you salt it. And so they eat kosher for health reasons. It's very interesting, but it does exist in large volumes. So Rambam says, now again, obviously it's not the only reason for kashrut, but according to Rambam, it's a main reason. Now he says the only thing that we can have a doubt regarding is the chazir. Now, I think that nowadays they hold that chazir is also unhealthy because it's very fat. That's my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong. But Rambam says, you know, chazir itself may be not so unhealthy. So the pig itself is not so unhealthy. But the reason why we should not eat it, that's amazing what he writes. He says the reason why we should not eat it is that here, let's read it from here. ורוב מה שמעשתו התורה, so the reason why the Torah is disgusted with pig is לרוב לכלוכו, is very dirty. ומזונו בדברים הנמאסים, and the pig eats dirty things. וכבר ידעת הקפדת התורה על ראיית הליך. So the Torah is very careful about removing dirt and unclean things from our midst. ואילו הייתה מותרת אכילת החזיר, if the Torah would have allowed it, eating pig, then he says the marketplaces and the houses would be more dirty than the buffoons. And then he gives an example, it's from the hand here, see? כמו שתראה ארצות הצרפתים היום. Just look at French, the Frenches today. So they are so dirty. Why? Because they eat pigs and the pigs are dirty. So that's why the French are, I'm sorry, I hope that no one is being offended. But that's what Rambam writes. So again, he says, even if the pig itself, the meat of the pig, the ham is not so bad for your health, but the production, that's very interesting. So the farming of pigs is bad for our health. Now, again, that is very interesting because today also there are arguments that even, let's say that meat can be healthy or kosher, but the meat production process is unhealthy, is bad for the climate, and other arguments. So these arguments rings true, I would say, with the way that Rambam here explains the reason why the Torah had banned eating pig. So all of that is extremely interesting. And again, that it emphasizes how much the Torah here is careful, and halacha and chachamim were very careful, not only about treating someone who is already ill, but also preventing future illness and danger. Now, so again, as I said, even this Rambam is very interesting, it's very extreme, but again, I don't think that anyone here is surprised by the instruction of halacha to try and avoid dangers and illness. The question is, what are the limits? What are the boundaries of such an obligation? And to what extent it's a real obligation? So we saw Rambam saying that we can enforce people not to endanger themselves. But to what extent? So I would like to look at two very interesting case studies. One is smoking, and one is genetic screening. Both of them were discussed in the last century, we may say, and both of them, we saw in them a developing body of science, and it's interesting to trace how the poskim were re-evaluating their positions according to the new scientific data. So let's begin with smoking. Now, we need to know that smoking was considered for many, many years as a healthy habit. It was considered good for digestion, and people were encouraged by the doctors to smoke pipe, smoke cigarettes. It was encouraged. Now, as we all know, in the last 50 years, more than that already, 70 years, so it became apparent that smoking can be very dangerous to the smoker health. And in the last few decades, they are also speaking about passive smoking. So even if you yourself are not smoking, but you are in proximity to someone that is smoking, then you inhale the smoke, and that can also endanger. So scientific knowledge had evolved in that field. Now, already more than 100 years ago, the Chafetz Chaim is Rabbi Israel Meir HaKohen Meradin, who also wrote the Mishnah Berurah. So he wrote many, many books that people are not familiar with. And one of these books is called Likutei Amarim. Now, here he speaks there about smoking. Now, again, we are speaking about the 1910s. So more than 100 years ago, and in a time in which people were not aware yet, mostly about the dangers of smoking. But I don't know who updated the Chafetz Chaim about that, or maybe he observed that it may be dangerous, but he has a very strong opinion. And he says, הנה כמה רופאים גזרו אומר, שכל מי שהוא אדם חלוש, אסור להרגיל את עצמו. So he says, at least regarding weak people, so people that are not completely healthy, they are unhealthy, they have a tendency to fall into illness, so they are not allowed to get the habit of smoking, שמחליש כוחותיו, because that weakens their energy, their strength. ולפעמים נוגע גם לנפש, and it may even endanger their life. So he knows that smoking, at least in some circumstances, may endanger your life. And he says, והנה דיברתי כמה פעמים עם חלושי כוח הודו. He says, I spoke with a few people that I know that are not in line of health, and I asked them to stop smoking. וענו לי שגם הם יודעים ומכירים בעצמם. So he says, I spoke with them, and they confirmed that smoking is bad for them. אך מפני שהורגלו בזה מכבר, קשה להם לפרוש מזה. They said, we are, again, in our language, we would say they are addicted. They are addicted. And it's extremely difficult to stop. קשה להם לפרוש מזה. אמרתי להם, so I answered them, says the חפץ חיים, מי התיר לכם להרגיל עצמכם כך? Who gave you permission to get yourself addicted? אמת, it is true, that חז"ל said, החובל בעצמו, אף על פי שאינו רשאי, so if you are injuring yourself, then there is no one you should pay to. Why? Because you injured yourself. But nonetheless, it is asur, you are not allowed to do so. So, על כל פנים, אינו רשאי לחבול בעצמו, you're not allowed to hurt yourself, to injure yourself. One, משום ונשמרתם לנפשותיכם. As we saw, there is a mitzvah to keep our life. Also, he says, it is only logical, דינו, הלא תבל ומלואה של הקדוש ברוך הוא לכבודו בראנו. God created us. And he gave each one of us in his mercy the required strength to do what he needs in Torah and to the world. And if you are damaging yourself, if you are reducing your own strength, then in the end, you need to give an accountant. You need to answer. What did you do with the strength that was given to you by God? And if you yourself injured and reduced your own strength, you would need to give answers. Why did you do so? So Chafetz Chaim was very clear that smoking, at least again, for weak people, that should be asur. Now again, he stops one step before saying no, he doesn't say it's asur. It doesn't say it exactly. He says it is injuring yourself, and injuring yourself is asur. Now, even many years later, we'll see in a second, in Tafshin Kaf Daled, in 1964, a great posek as the Igut Moshe Feinstein, stopped one step before saying that it is asur to smoke. Now, before we read his very short tshuva, there is a Gemara we need to be familiar with to understand that it's a very important concept in which would explain us the boundary of our obligation to avoid damage. So the Gemara says, in the name of Shmuel, now, they were, in the time of the Gemara, one of the very important medical treatments that they had as preventive medical care was the drawing of blood. So they believed very strongly that if you take blood out once a week or once a month, then that would assist your health. So I heard also today people speak in that manner. I don't know if it is correct or not. I mean, you ask your local doctor. I really don't know. I heard they say that it does encourage the reproduction of new blood cells. So I don't know. I shouldn't speak about things I have no knowledge in. But at least in their time, they believed very strongly in drawing blood. Okay, fine. They also believed, or at least some of them believed, that it is important to do it in days in which the constellations of the stars is in a certain way. Now, again, we discredit astrology. Now, in their times, they didn't see it as magic, at least again, some of them. They saw it as science. So stars have some, we'd call it gravity or something else, effects on what happens on Earth. So it can also affect our health. Now, again, nowadays, this whole theory is completely discredited. But back then, it took sway. And Chachamim held according to the medical knowledge that were available at their time, which is completely perfect. They were not doctors, they were sages of Torah. And they asked the medical experts of their time, what are their opinions regarding certain elements? So what they had, again, some of them had, was that on certain days, it would be not healthy to draw blood. So on Friday, it is not healthy to draw blood. Why? Because the stars, the Mars is aligned in a certain way, which is not good for you. But the Mars says, but people do draw blood on Friday, so why aren't they afraid? Why aren't they careful from this danger? Why don't they avoid it? So Gemara says, and we are more interested here in the answer than in the question, כיוון דדשו ברבים shomer ptaim Hashem. So because many people have transgressed, have stepped in this road, then God save the time, meaning the people that don't look too much. So basically the Gemara says, you are right, it may be safer not to draw blood on Friday, but that's what people do, and most of the time it's fine, so it's allowed. And God would have mercy. So we see from here that there are limits to our obligation to avoid danger. If it's something that people usually do not consider as such a danger and they do it, then one is allowed. So for example, we all know that eating, candies doesn't do any good to your health. No good. Nonetheless, if one is eating once a week, once a month, he eats a candy. So it doesn't contribute anything to your health, but that's not something that's considered by people to be too dangerous. So you're allowed to do so. That's basically what the Gemara says. Now, it is very difficult to put the finger where exactly the line should be drawn. What should be deemed dangerous in a way that it is asur to do, and what is allowed. Now, the basic answer here the Gemara gives, the basic definition is dashu beirabim. If it is done by many people, then you can be lenient. You don't have to be lenient, but you can be lenient. Now, Reb Moshe Feinstein, going back to the question of smoking. So here is an answer. He wrote a very short and brief answer. He wrote, you see here, regarding smoking cigarettes in 7th day of Hanukkah, Tafshin Kaf Dalet. That is 1964. 1964. To Rav Aaron Kirschenboim. הנה בדבר עישון סיגריות. So regarding smoking cigarettes. ודאי, it is clear, מכיוון שיש חשש להתחלות. So because there is a danger to get sick by it, and sick is very gentle word, meaning that we speak about dangers of cancer. מן הראוי להיזהר מזה. So he says it is appropriate not to smoke. אבל לומר שאסור מאיסור סכנתא, but to say it's asur because of the danger, that's halachically an isur to smoke, he says, no, I wouldn't say that. מכיוון שדשו ברבים, many people do smoke, and they do not see it as danger. And כבר איתה בגמרא בחיי גבנה, and we see in the Gemara about this type of matters, shomer petayim Hashem, God saved the fools. Right? So you're right, it is foolish to smoke, but many people are foolish, that's fine. ובפרט שכמה גדולי תורה מדורות שעברו, ודורנו מהשליש, also some of the great scholars, Torah scholars, of last generations, of our generation since 1964, do smoke. וממילא אף לאלו שמחמירים לחוש להסכנה. So even if you yourself, if you are careful, and you do not smoke because of the danger, let's say that someone is smoking, ask you if you have fire. You are allowed to give him fire. And it's not a problem of lifnei iver, the issue to put a stumbling block before a blind person. Why? Because, as I said, it is foolish, but foolishness is not prohibited. You are allowed, we may say you're not allowed to be stupid, but you are allowed to be foolish. And that does not cross the line. So that was in 1964. 1964. The next tshuva is from Rabbi Eliezer Wallenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, and that's a tshuva from Gimel Chodesh Marbim Besimcha, so that is Adar, Tafshin Mem Bet, 1982. So you can make the short calculation, that's from 64 to 82. So we speak about 18 years gap. But in these 18 years, many things happen. And in 82, it is completely clear with many studies that support the conclusion that smoking is extremely dangerous in the long run, And that's an answer to Dr. Eli Yosef Shusheim. Maybe the name is familiar to you. He is the head of EFRAT, the organizations that help women that are in pregnancy and they maybe want to abort for financial reasons, so they help them to have the baby. So anyhow, he wrote a question to Rav Eliezer Wellenberg, asking him, is it allowed to smoke? No, it was not such a natural question. He also included in his letter to Rav Wellenberg many studies about the dangers in smoking. And he says, so Rav Wellenberg, this is Eliezer answers, נראה ברור ללא צל של ספק, it seems clear to me, without any doubt, he says, without a shade of a doubt, כי אין מקום להתברך בלב, so you cannot bless yourself in your own heart, as some people do want to do, he says here, in brackets, ולהורות, and to instruct, כי היות והעישון רבים דשו בו, because smoking is something that many people do, then you are allowed to do so. He says, no, that is incorrect. They said the license is to be foolish, but not to be stupid. And smoking, he says, in 1982, is not foolish. It's already stupidness. He says it's too much dangerous. And even if many people do so, if many people, as the common saying goes, if many people jump from the roof, you wouldn't jump after them. So there is a limit to the permission to follow the common practice. If the common practice is extremely stupid, extremely dangerous, then halacha ban it. And says it's Eliezer, בخגון הנידון דידן, in our case, that in the last decades, לאור המחקרים המדעיים והרפואיים השונים, in light of the different scientific and medical studies, it surfaced, it says, בממדים מבהילים, in frightening dimensions, the dangers and the damage that smoking can cause, and this is something that is already known in the world, and governments require the cigarettes companies to put warnings on the cigarette boxes. He says it would be absurd to look away and to just say that Shomer P'tayim Hashem, that God saved the fools. God saved again the fools, but not the stupid. And he says, and in the סיכומם של דברים, in summary, זאת תורת העולה מדברינו להלכה, the halacha is, כי שפיר יש מקום לאסור העישון על פי דין תורה, it is not allowed to smoke according to Torah. And if people smoke in public places, he says, anyone that is there is allowed to למחות, to rebuke and to stop the smoker from damaging, injuring, and endangering the health of himself and of others. That's a very sharp opinion. I wouldn't say that it's completely agreed upon everyone, but it seems to go along with the line we saw earlier by the Rambam. So when there is a certain threshold that is being crossed, when it is clear that there is a danger, then this, he says it's asur according to Torah, regarding in Torah. My father, Zichrono Livracha, he was smoking heavily, more than a box a day, and he had a heart attack. When I was 4 years old. And then the doctor told him that if he wants to see the bar mitzvah of his son, then he should quit smoking immediately. And he did. He quit smoking overnight. Overnight. And that's one example which I'm very familiar with. Of the dangers of smoking. And and again, the question is to what extent it is ASO? It is ASO. According to Eliezer, it is ASO. And that seems, as I said, to be very, very logical, and it has to do with preventive medicine. But we also see here the way that the poskim, again, reevaluated their position according to the scientific knowledge. Now, again, it may be, let's say, 20 years from now, they would see that in certain cases, it is healthy to smoke. So halacha again would adapt, because there is no issur of smoking per se. The issur is on damaging ourselves. Now, the next topic I would like to touch upon, and we will do it very quick and brief because we only have 5 or 7 minutes left. And that is the question, much more complicated question. That is the question of genetic screening. Now, there is a difference. If you speak about smoking, you speak about what you are not allowed to do. If you speak about genetic screening, you speak about what you need to do. Now, it is easier to prohibit something that is danger than to obligate something which may yield profit or that may enable us to avoid risk factors. So can we say that a couple before getting married must make genetic screening in order to make sure that they are not endangering their children with certain genetic diseases? So we know that in the Jewish population, there are certain risk factors that are higher than in the non-Jewish population. That is because we married ourselves, right? The last 5,000 years, 4,000 years. So we have some genetic mutations that we are dealing with. So, for example, Ashkenazic Jewry has a problem with a disease called Tay-Sachs. Lo aleinu velo alechem. Very, very severe disease. Now, it may be a recessive gene. So I may be a carrier of the gene, and someone's, I mean, a husband is a carrier and doesn't know it, and a wife is a carrier and she doesn't know it. But their children, if two of them would marry and they would have children, then their children would have a 50% chance or 25% chance, depending of being afflicted with this extremely severe disease. And that was a disease that was very common among Ashkenazi Jews. Very common. Now, already in the 70s, there was an ability to make a not very expensive diagnosis check and to tell someone if he is a carrier of this recessive gene, and if he is and she is, then they should not get married. They should not get married. That's all. And the question was, should we obligate people, young people, to take the test? Now, there was an answer written by Rav Menashe Klein, who was an Hungarian Rav. He passed away a few years ago. He was Hungarian. He was an extremely important posek in the Hasidic world. And this is a tshuva, a very recent tshuva. It's a tshuva from 92. So that's, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But the genetics, meaning it was already very clear. It was already very clear. And I wouldn't read it inside because we don't have the time. And I would, Emir Hashem, would upload the file so people that are interested would be able to read. But he says not only that it is not, that I do not obligate people to take the test, he thinks it's asur. It's asur to take the genetic test. Because he says these are covered things and these are up to God to decide, and that's the end of the story. The permission for the doctors to heal is only for things that we see and are in front of our eyes. But checking genetics and the probabilities for disease, that is beyond our duty. And if it is beyond our duty, it is asur. Because God commanded us to be tamim, to walk faithfully with God and to rely on God. And that is too much of taking responsibility on our shoulders and chas v'chalila, a lack of faith. He says it's a lack of faith. So that's a very radical position and not common at all. I bring it here just to try and give us, but he's a very important person. He was a very important person. So a very strong position, very radical position. He says it's a lack of faith to do genetic screening. On the other side, again, Reb Moshe Feinstein. So when he spoke about cigarettes, he said, I cannot enforce not smoking. But in 1973, he writes about this question of Tay-Sachs, and he says, it has nothing to do with Tamim Tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. It has nothing to do with being faithful. Why? Because it's so easy to take the test, and it's not expensive. So it doesn't say we need to obligate, but it says we need to inform people. We need to inform. He says we need to advertise in newspapers so people would know that they can take the test. By the way, it is a very interesting fact and happy fact that Reb Moshe Feinstein's position was basically taken, and there was a whole department of Tay-Sachs, I think in Sinai Hospital in New York, but I didn't check it before, so that's something that I need to check to say for sure. But there was a whole department that was closed. Most of the patients there for Tay-Sachs were Jewish, and after they began to do the genetic screening, they were able to prevent almost 100% of the cases. So that's amazing. That's amazing. By the way, there are different possibilities to do it also here in Israel, obviously. There is a whole organization that is doing the checkups, tests. The Kupot Cholim are offering different baskets. Now, again, it's very difficult to say where we should draw the line. Obviously, one can get completely crazy and do thousands of tests. That is completely unnecessary. But for things that are A, preventable, B, do exist, and it is a danger, and C, not too expensive, then not doing them is a type of negligency. That's what the Igut Moshe says. So that has nothing to do with being faithful with God. Being faithful with God is following his commands. And God commanded us to be involved proactively in avoiding illness and suffering. And that seems to be the general rule. Now, it is very unfortunate that because of human nature, we usually only respond when something already happened. So instead of taking preventive measures that would avoid pain and avoid suffering and prevent illness, we only wake up, and I completely include myself in this we only wake up after chas v'chalila something already happened and it's too late. And now go and treat it. But halacha directs us to take much more seriously preventive care and avoiding diseases. And we saw that sometimes it's even obligated. There are things that Chazal completely prohibited because of the risk factor involved. And we should obviously be as careful as we can and as prudent as we can in order to follow the will of God. And that is to remain healthy, to remain safe, and then to be able to be faithful servants to God. Now, we were not able at all to touch the question of vaccines, and maybe we'll do it next week, maybe in some other occasion. But the last thing that I would like to speak about, maybe when speaking about public health systems, I don't know if we do it next week or the week after it. Be'ezrat Hashem, I would like to speak about the question of alternative medicine. So alternative medicine is a very interesting topic to itself, and what the halacha has, if at all the halacha has something to say about alternative medicine, we want to speak about that in the near future. So I hope that we were waken up by this shoe at least a little more to take care of ourselves. So take care and stay safe. And Bezrat Hashem, we will meet again next week.
Thank you.